The Mothman. In November 1966, in the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, two young couples drove at night toward an industrial zone locals called the TNT area, a spread of abandoned World War II munitions bunkers swallowed by weeds and fog. They later told police they saw something step out from near the road, not like a man and not like any bird they could name. It was tall, dark, and strangely shaped, with eyes that seemed to glow a deep red when their headlights hit it. Then it opened what looked like wings and rose into the air. What happened next is where the story stops behaving like a simple misidentification. The couples reported that the creature followed their car, not behind them, but alongside them, keeping pace as they accelerated. They claimed it moved with a speed that did not make sense, clocking in near 100 miles per hour as they fled back toward town. The next day, the rumor was already loose. Within weeks, the area around Point Pleasant produced a chain of additional reports from drivers, hunters, night watchmen, and ordinary residents who had no reason to invent the same details. A large winged figure, red eyes, a sense of being watched, a feeling that the air itself had turned wrong. Witness descriptions were imperfect, as all human descriptions are, but the repeating elements were hard to ignore. Many accounts placed the creature at roughly 6 to 7 feet tall when standing. The wings were said to span wide enough to blot out parts of headlights, though no one could agree on an exact measurement. The eyes were the detail that kept returning, described as bright, reflective, and unnaturally fixed, as if the face had no expression except warning. Some witnesses insisted it had no visible head, and that the glowing eyes sat high on the chest. Others thought the head was tucked low, like a bird at rest. A few reported a high-pitched sound, like a squeal or metallic screech, before the figure moved. As the sightings multiplied, so did the tension. People began traveling in pairs at night. Locals avoided the TNT area. Police received calls they could not file under any normal category. Newspapers picked up the story, and the name that would outlive the town itself appeared in print: the Mothman. Then the pattern sharpened into something colder. On December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed during evening traffic, dropping vehicles into the Ohio River. 46 people died. The disaster had an engineering explanation involving a structural failure under load, but the timing fused the tragedy to the sightings in the public mind. For many residents, the creature became less like an animal and more like an omen that had been circling the town before the fall. After the collapse, the reports began to thin. Not instantly, but noticeably, as if whatever had been drawing eyes at night no longer had a reason to remain. Investigators and skeptics proposed familiar answers: a large owl seen in poor light, optical illusion amplified by fear, a cascade of rumor-producing copycat sightings. Some pointed to the way red-eye shine can appear intense when light strikes an animal at the right angle. Others argued that the TNT area, with its tunnels and open fields, created perfect conditions for misperception. But none of those explanations fully accounts for the consistency of the fear, the speed claims, and the way the sightings clustered around one place in 1 year, like a storm that forms, circles, and then vanishes. If a community can be trained by rumor to see a monster, why did the details converge instead of drifting? And if there was nothing there, why did so many people report the same terrible certainty, that they were not watching a bird, but being watched by something that understood they were watching back? The Beast of Gévaudan. Long before photographs, before social media, before mass hysteria could spread at the speed of a signal, there was a rural province in southern France where something hunted in open daylight. Between 1764 and 1767, in the region of Gévaudan, reports began to circulate of a large predator attacking villagers. At first, it was dismissed as wolves. Wolves were common. Wolves killed livestock. Wolves occasionally attacked the vulnerable. But this was different. The first confirmed victim was a young woman tending cattle. Survivors described a creature larger than any wolf they had seen, with a reddish coat streaked by dark markings, a long tail, and a broad chest. It did not behave like a normal predator. It did not simply drag prey into the forest. It targeted the throat and face. It seemed bold, deliberate. As the months passed, the number of victims grew: shepherds, children, women working in fields. Reports claimed the creature sometimes ignored livestock entirely and went straight for humans. Panic spread across the countryside. Armed patrols formed. Peasants refused to travel alone. Church sermons spoke of punishment and prophecy. And still, the descriptions repeated. Tall at the shoulder, unnaturally elongated snout, eyes described as fierce and fixed. Some claimed its fur was coarse and bristled along the spine. Others insisted it moved with a strange, bounding gait, unlike a wolf's steady lope. Survivors who fought it off said it did not retreat like a startled animal. It returned, it tested, it circled. The French crown took notice. King Louis XV authorized professional hunters to track and kill the beast. Large-scale hunts were organized. Hundreds of men combed forests and valleys. Wolves were shot in large numbers. Some were displayed publicly as proof that the threat had ended. But the attacks continued. If it was a wolf, it was unlike any recorded in the region. If it was a pack, why did witnesses so consistently describe a single dominant creature? And if multiple animals were responsible, how did their descriptions align so closely across dozens of separate encounters? Official records from the period estimate that over 100 people were attacked, with many fatalities. The numbers vary depending on the archive, but the fear was real enough to mobilize soldiers and hunters across the countryside. Eventually, in 1767, a large wolf was shot by a local hunter named Jean Chastel. After its death, the attacks ceased. To some, that was the end of the story. But questions remained. The carcass reportedly displayed unusual proportions, though documentation of its examination was limited. Some accounts hinted at scars suggesting prior injury or confinement. Others whispered of something more exotic, perhaps an imported animal, perhaps even something deliberately released. Yet no preserved specimen survives. No skeletal remains conclusively tied to the attacks can be studied today. What remains are written testimonies, royal decrees, and a pattern of witness descriptions that feel disturbingly consistent for an era without mass media amplification. In a time when villages were isolated and literacy was limited, how did so many people, across miles of farmland and forest, describe the same creature in such similar terms? Was it an exceptionally large wolf, its legend inflated by terror, a hybrid animal unfamiliar to locals, or something that slipped into the margins of history before taxonomy could pin it down? If fear alone shapes a monster, why did this one leave such a precise and repeated outline in the memories of those who survived it? The Hopkinsville Goblins. On the night of August 21st, 1955, in a rural farmhouse near Kelly and Hopkinsville, Kentucky, a family claimed their home came under siege. It began with a streak of light across the sky. One of the men present, Billy Ray Taylor, reported seeing a bright object descend behind the tree line. At first, it was treated as a shooting star, but curiosity pulled him and the homeowner, Lucky Sutton, outside to investigate. What they described next would become one of the most documented multi-witness creature encounters in American folklore. They saw a small figure emerging from the darkness, about 3 to 4 feet tall, large, round head, oversized eyes that reflected light, thin arms that ended in what looked like claws. The skin, they said, appeared metallic or pale, almost glowing under moonlight. The men ran back inside. Moments later, the creature approached the door. What followed was not a brief glimpse, but hours of tension. According to the family's statements, the beings surrounded the house. They peered through windows. They appeared on the roof. At one point, one was seen climbing a tree and drifting down, as if it weighed less than expected. The family did not simply watch. They fired at it. Multiple gunshots rang through the night, shotguns and pistols. Each time a creature was hit, witnesses claimed it flipped backward or floated away but showed no visible injury. No blood, no collapse, no remains. Neighbors heard the gunfire. Police were called. When officers arrived, they found bullet holes in window frames and doors. They found frightened adults and children, but they found no bodies, no footprints, no physical evidence beyond the family's damaged home. And yet, the consistency in their accounts raised questions. There were 11 people present that night, adults and children. Their descriptions aligned on key features: the height, the glowing eyes, the claw-like hands, the strange floating movement. They maintained their story under questioning. They did not appear intoxicated. They did not recant. Skeptics later suggested great horned owls, their reflective eyes amplified by flashlight beams. Others proposed mass hysteria, a shared misinterpretation, triggered by the earlier sighting of a bright object in the sky. Some researchers noted that the creature's appearance resembled popular science fiction imagery of the 1950s. But that explanation introduces another complication. If the event was influenced by cultural imagery, why did the details not drift more dramatically? Why did separate witnesses inside the house describe nearly identical proportions and behavior? Why did trained officers report no signs of intoxication or prank setup? And perhaps most unsettling of all, if nothing was there, what were they shooting at for hours? The encounter did not stretch across weeks like the Beast of Gévaudan. It did not precede a structural disaster like the Mothman sightings. It unfolded in a single night, intense and contained. A house, a family, creatures in the yard, then silence. No bodies were recovered. No clear explanation satisfied every detail. The story endured, not because of one witness, but because of many. When a single person claims to see something impossible, doubt comes easily. But when an entire household insists they were surrounded, and the physical aftermath confirms they believed it enough to fire repeatedly into the dark, the question shifts. Were they defending themselves from something real, or did fear, once ignited, construct a shared enemy out of shadow and expectation? If imagination can synchronize across 11 minds at once, what does that say about perception? And if it cannot, what was standing outside that farmhouse in 1955? The Flatwoods Monster. On the evening of September 12, 1952, in the small town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, a bright object was seen streaking across the sky. Several boys playing outside watched it descend beyond a nearby hill. They ran to inform their mother, who gathered a small group of neighbors to investigate. It was early evening. The air was cooling. What they expected to find was debris. A small plane crash, perhaps. A meteorite. Instead, they reported something standing in the clearing. At first, they noticed a pulsing red light. Then, as they approached, one of them aimed a flashlight toward the source. The beam revealed a tall figure, estimated between 7 and 10 feet in height. It appeared to have a dark green or metallic body. Its head, witnesses said, was large and shaped strangely, some describing it as resembling a spade or an ace of hearts. And then there were the eyes, glowing, round, reflective in the light. The creature did not rush them. It did not speak. It seemed to hover or glide rather than walk. One witness later claimed it emitted a hissing sound before moving away into the darkness. The group fled. Later that night, several of those present reported physical symptoms: nausea, throat irritation, and a burning sensation in their eyes. Some described a strong metallic odor lingering in the air near the site. News spread quickly. By the next day, reporters arrived. The story entered headlines. A sketch was created based on the group's shared description. The illustration showed a towering figure with a dramatic hood-like headpiece and clawed hands, floating above the ground. Skeptics moved in almost immediately. Astronomers suggested the bright object in the sky was a meteor. Investigators noted that a barn owl perched in the trees could appear larger and more alien under flashlight glare. The metallic smell could have been the result of mist, disturbed vegetation, or imagination amplified by fear. But there were complications. Multiple witnesses, both children and adults, described the same head shape, the same posture, the same red glow. Their accounts aligned in key areas despite being interviewed separately. The physical symptoms reported were documented at the time, though never conclusively linked to any measurable toxin. And there was the question of scale. If it had been an owl, why did witnesses consistently describe a figure far taller than any bird? If it was a trick of light, why did the image crystallize into such a distinct, repeatable silhouette? Unlike the farmhouse siege in Kentucky, this encounter lasted only minutes. There was no prolonged standoff, no gunfire, just a sudden confrontation and retreat. But something else made it unsettling. The figure did not behave like a startled animal. It did not scatter chaotically. It seemed composed, intentional, almost aware of being observed. In the years that followed, Flatwoods became associated with the broader wave of unidentified aerial phenomena reported across the United States in the early 1950s. The timing placed the event within a larger pattern of skyward sightings and ground-level encounters. But patterns can be imposed after the fact. The core remains. A small group of people approached what they believed to be a fallen object, and instead encountered a towering figure that none of them could classify. Their drawings matched. Their fear was immediate. Their descriptions have not dissolved into contradiction over time. If perception under stress exaggerates size and shape, why did it exaggerate in the same direction for everyone present? Was this another case of light, distance, and expectation reshaping reality? Or did something step briefly into view that night, just long enough to leave behind a single, coherent outline. And if it did, why did it choose that hill on that evening in front of that group, the Loveland Frog? In 1972, near the Little Miami River in Loveland, Ohio, a police officer named Ray Shockey was driving late at night when he noticed something unusual on the roadside. At first glance, it appeared to be an animal crouched near the pavement, but as he slowed his patrol car and angled his headlights toward it, the shape shifted. According to Shockey's report, the figure stood upright. It was described as roughly 3 to 4 feet tall, with leathery skin and a posture that resembled a human standing on 2 legs. The head, he later stated, looked frog-like, large eyes, broad mouth, limbs that seemed too defined to belong to a typical amphibian. The creature turned toward the light. For a moment, officer and figure were locked in stillness. Then it leapt over a guardrail and disappeared toward the river. This was not the first time something similar had been reported in Loveland. Nearly 2 decades earlier, in 1955, a businessman claimed to have encountered 3 small humanoid creatures under a bridge, their skin glistening, their voices low and mechanical. That earlier account was largely dismissed as an embellished anecdote, but now a uniformed officer had placed his name behind the sighting. 2 weeks after Shockey's encounter, another Loveland officer, Mark Matthews, reported seeing a similar creature in nearly the same area. Matthews initially claimed he fired at it as it crouched by the roadside, believing it to be some unknown animal. Later, he would suggest it may have been a large iguana that escaped from a private owner. That revision did not close the case. Both officers described a figure that stood upright before retreating. Both encounters occurred at night. Both took place near water. The overlapping details, separated by days and filtered through official channels, gave the story an unusual durability. Skeptics argued that the late 1960s and early 1970s were fertile ground for strange reports. Environmental anxieties were rising. Popular culture was saturated with amphibious monsters and mutated creatures. A large reptile or escaped exotic pet, seen briefly under headlights, could easily distort into something more dramatic. Yet something resists complete dismissal. Police officers are trained observers. They are accustomed to identifying animals, assessing threats, and filing factual reports. While misidentification is always possible, the confidence with which Shockey described the figure standing upright complicates the simpler explanations. There is also the matter of repetition. If this was merely a loose iguana or large frog, why were there no captured specimens? Why did the reports cluster around a specific stretch of road near the river? Why did descriptions across decades converge around the same basic silhouette? Humanoid posture, amphibian features, sudden disappearance into darkness? The Loveland Frog does not carry the death toll of Gévaudan. It is not tied to a structural collapse like the Mothman. It does not involve hours of gunfire like the Kelly Hopkinsville case. Instead, it lingers in a different way. Brief, quiet, official. A patrol car's headlights illuminating something that should not be standing upright. If imagination can override training, it does so cleanly and convincingly. But if something else stepped briefly into view on that roadside, it did so just long enough to be recorded, filed, and then lost again in the margins. When authority becomes the witness, doubt does not vanish. It changes shape. Was this a simple animal seen under deceptive light? Or did something ancient and amphibious rise for a moment from the riverbank, only to slip back before anyone could prove it was ever there? The Dover Demon. On the night of April 21st, 1977, in the quiet town of Dover, Massachusetts, a 17-year-old named William Bartlett was driving along a dark, wooded road when he saw something that forced him to slow down. At first, it looked like a figure crawling along a low stone wall. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The headlights swept across it, and the shape became clearer, small, hairless, its skin pale against the dark trees. The head appeared disproportionately large, almost bulbous, with enormous glowing eyes. It clung to the wall with long, thin fingers. Bartlett did not stop for long. He drove home and sketched what he had seen. The drawing would later become one of the most recognizable illustrations in cryptid lore. The creature was hunched, its limbs elongated, its face almost featureless except for the eyes. That might have been the end of it. But within hours, 2 other teenagers, driving separately on nearby roads, reported seeing something similar. The second witness described a small figure standing in the middle of the street. It had large, luminous eyes and no visible mouth or nose. When approached, it moved awkwardly into the trees. The The third witness saw a creature with the same oversized head and thin limbs, partially obscured by brush, but unmistakably not an animal he could identify. The sightings occurred within roughly 24 hours. The witnesses did not coordinate their accounts beforehand. Their descriptions, taken independently, aligned in the most important details: the size, the hairless skin, the massive eyes, the unnatural proportions. No physical evidence was recovered, no footprints, no hair, no sound recordings, only sketches and testimony. Skeptics suggested a young moose or calf seen in partial light. Others proposed a prank, a costumed individual taking advantage of dark rural roads. Some pointed to the way headlights can distort perception, exaggerating size and altering proportions. But those explanations faced the same friction seen in other cases. If it was a prank, why were there no additional reports in the days that followed? Why did no one claim responsibility? Why did 3 separate drivers describe nearly identical anatomical features? If it was a known animal, why did none of the witnesses recognize it as such, despite growing up in a region familiar with wildlife? And perhaps more intriguing, why did the creature seem to avoid direct confrontation? It did not chase. It did not attack. It appeared briefly, then withdrew into the trees. The Dover demon, as it came to be called, lacks the violence of Gévaudan and the spectacle of aerial lights seen in Flatwoods. It exists almost entirely as a silhouette in headlights. But there is something uniquely unsettling about multiple independent witnesses describing the same improbable proportions. A head too large for its body, eyes too large for its face, limbs too thin to support it. If mass suggestion spreads through conversation, how did these descriptions converge before the story was public? And if they were all mistaken, why did their mistakes align so precisely? The road where Bartlett first saw it still exists. Cars still pass along that stretch of darkness each night. Nothing unusual is routinely reported there now, which raises the question: if something small and intelligent briefly crossed those roads in 1977, did it leave, or did it simply learn to avoid headlights altogether? The Enfield Horror. On the night of April 25th, 1973, in Enfield, Illinois, a young boy told his parents that something had scratched at his bedroom window. At first, they dismissed it. Animals roamed the rural edges of town: raccoons, stray dogs, owls. But minutes later, the father, Henry McDaniel, heard it himself. A strange sound outside the house. Not a growl, not quite a hiss. He later described it as something between a scream and a high-pitched whistle. He stepped outside with a flashlight. What he claimed to see standing near his home did not match any animal he could identify. The creature was described as roughly 4 to 5 feet tall, grayish in color, with a compact body and 3 legs. Its eyes glowed pink in the beam of the light. McDaniel said it stood momentarily before bounding away with incredible speed, covering distance in leaps of up to 75 feet at a time. The description reached local authorities quickly. Deputies arrived and conducted a search. Footprints were reportedly found near the house, but they were unusual. Some reports described them as resembling dog tracks, yet not consistent with a normal canine gait. The following nights brought more accounts. Other residents reported hearing the same high-pitched noise. A few claimed to have seen a similar shape moving at the edge of fields. Fear began to spread across the small community. People armed themselves. Children were kept indoors after dark. Local newspapers covered the story. A composite description circulated. The creature gained a name: the Enfield Horror. Skeptics pointed to escaped kangaroos, noting that a zoo in the region might have had exotic animals. Others suggested large dogs seen under poor lighting conditions. A 3-legged leap, they argued, could be misinterpreted movement in the dark. But there were problems with those explanations. No kangaroo was ever officially reported missing. No captured animal matched the description, and witnesses insisted the body proportions did not align with any known species they had encountered. Henry McDaniel maintained his account publicly. He did not retract it. He did not soften the details. He insisted what he saw was not a prank, not a dog, not a known animal. There were also the sounds. Multiple residents described a distinct, repeating cry in the nights that followed. It was not a bark, not a howl, not a screech typical of local wildlife. Recordings were not made. Only descriptions survived. Unlike the Dover demon, which appeared and vanished in a single night, the Enfield case unfolded over several days. The repetition amplified tension. It was not just a fleeting shadow in headlights. It was something that lingered near homes. And then, as abruptly as it began, the reports slowed. No capture, no confirmed physical evidence, no clear resolution. If fear spread socially, why did this case produce similar descriptions from separate households? If it was a common animal misidentified repeatedly, why did it seem to defy classification by people familiar with rural wildlife? And if it truly had 3 legs, as some insisted, what biological model supports such movement at high speed across uneven terrain? Perhaps the most unsettling detail is not the appearance. It is the pattern. A creature emerges near a small town. It is seen by multiple people. It produces a distinct sound. It triggers armed vigilance. Then it fades back into absence. How many times is that cycle repeated in places too small to make headlines? And how many shapes have moved just beyond the beam of a flashlight, close enough to be described, but never close enough to be caught? The Van Meter visitor. In the autumn of 1903, in the small town of Van Meter, Iowa, something began appearing in the night sky. The first sighting came from a local businessman who reported seeing a brilliant light hovering above rooftops after dark. At first, he assumed it was a prank, perhaps a lantern raised by someone looking for attention. But the light did not flicker like a flame. It moved deliberately, slowly. Then the shape beneath it became visible. Witnesses described a large, winged figure gliding above buildings. It emitted a powerful beam of light from what was described as a horn or protrusion on its head. The light was said to be intense, focused, and unnatural for the time period. Electricity was still new to many rural towns. Portable spotlights were not common tools. Over the following nights, more residents reported seeing the same luminous figure. It did not appear once and vanish. It returned. Men gathered with rifles. They tracked it through alleys and across rooftops. Some claimed to have fired at it as it perched on top of a building. The bullets, according to reports, had no visible effect. The creature was described as bat-like, but larger than any bat native to the region. It had wings broad enough to glide silently over streets. The glowing horn remained the most consistent feature, casting a beam that seemed almost mechanical in precision. Newspaper accounts from the time recorded the panic. Groups of armed townspeople organized nightly watches. The being was reportedly seen entering an abandoned coal mine on the outskirts of town. At one point, a posse followed it toward the mine entrance, but no capture was made. After several nights of activity, the sightings stopped, just as abruptly as they had begun. Skeptics have suggested mass hysteria, fueled by the novelty of electric lighting and the fascination with technological progress at the turn of the century. Some argue that large birds, seen under unusual lighting conditions, could produce distorted impressions. Others believe the story was exaggerated by newspapers seeking readership in a rapidly modernizing America. But there are details that complicate the dismissal. Multiple witnesses, across separate nights, described the same glowing appendage, the same size, the same silent flight, the same mine entrance. In 1903, there were no viral headlines spreading instant imagery across the country, no television, no internet. Stories traveled slowly, primarily through local conversation and print. If the creature was imagined, why did it return repeatedly? Why did it appear over multiple nights in a pattern that suggests movement rather than panic? And why did the sightings cluster so tightly around one small town, instead of radiating outward through rumor? The Van Meter visitor, as it would later be known, left no physical remains, no preserved body, no confirmed artifact, only testimony, and a timeline. A luminous winged figure, several nights, armed resistance, a retreat into a mine shaft. Then nothing. If it was a hoax, it was sustained and coordinated without modern communication tools. If it was misidentification, it was remarkably consistent across multiple observers. And if it was something else entirely, why did it choose a small Iowa town in 1903 as its stage? Did it emerge from the mine, or was the mine simply a convenient shadow in which to disappear? The spring-heeled jack. Long before modern cryptid culture, before UFO waves and televised investigations, there was a figure that haunted the streets of Victorian England. In 1837, in the outskirts of London, reports began to circulate of a strange attacker who could leap extraordinary distances. Young women claimed a tall figure had emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing like red coals. Some described a tight-fitting suit that shimmered in moonlight. Others spoke of clawed hands and a face that looked almost demonic. The most consistent detail was not the appearance. It was the movement. Witnesses insisted the figure could vault over walls, clear rooftops, and escape across entire streets in a single bound. He did not run, he did not sprint. He launched himself vertically, landing with impossible precision before disappearing again into darkness. Newspapers soon gave him a name, Spring-Heeled Jack. Unlike many other cases in this list, the sightings were not limited to one town or one night. Reports spread across London and later appeared in other English cities. Over the years, dozens claimed encounters. Some accounts described attacks, with clothing torn and victims left shaken but alive. Others involved nothing more than a sudden appearance and a high, mocking laugh, before a tremendous leap carried the figure out of reach. The descriptions varied in minor details, but the core remained stable. Tall, cloaked or tightly dressed, glowing eyes, metallic claws, and the leaps. Skeptics proposed a costume prankster, perhaps even multiple individuals capitalizing on the legend. The Victorian era was ripe with theatricality and fascination with the grotesque. Some historians suggest that Spring-Heeled Jack may have been a myth inflated by sensationalist newspapers, but even that explanation raises questions. If it was a prank, how did it persist across decades without a single confirmed arrest? How did witnesses across different regions describe nearly identical physical capabilities? Why did reports taper off rather than escalate into widespread copycat chaos? And then there is the matter of physics. Even the most athletic human cannot clear rooftops in a single bound. Exaggeration is expected in fearful testimony, but repetition of the same exaggerated feature suggests something deeper than casual storytelling. Spring-Heeled Jack occupies a strange position in this list. He was seen not by a single community, but by many. Over years, across cities. His legend blurred into folklore, yet the initial reports were treated seriously enough to involve authorities. Was he a clever human exploiting darkness and panic? A coordinated series of hoaxes? Or something that briefly moved through Victorian streets, testing the edges of belief before retreating into myth? If mass imagination can carry a figure across decades, why did it eventually fade? And if it was something more than a man in costume, why did it never allow itself to be cornered? The Falkville Metal Man. On the night of October 17th, 1973, in Falkville, Alabama, the police department received a call about a strange figure walking along the highway. The caller described something reflective, not an animal, not a person dressed normally, something metallic. Police Chief Jeffrey Greenhaw responded personally. When he arrived, he spotted the figure moving along the roadside. He stepped out of his patrol car and called out to it. The being did not respond verbally. Instead, it raised an arm slowly, as if acknowledging the officer's presence. Greenhaw later described the figure as roughly 6 feet tall, covered head to toe in a shiny silver material. It appeared seamless, like a suit wrapped tightly around the body. The face was featureless beneath the reflective surface. No visible eyes, no visible mouth. Unlike many other cases on this list, Greenhaw did something different. He took photographs. Using a Polaroid camera, he captured several images of the figure standing under the night sky. In the photos, a humanoid silhouette can be seen, reflective and smooth, illuminated by flash. The proportions appear human. The surface appears metallic. After taking the photos, Greenhaw attempted to approach closer. The figure suddenly turned and ran. According to the officer's report, it moved with unnatural speed, covering distance quickly before disappearing into darkness. Greenhaw pursued it in his patrol car, but eventually lost sight of it. The photographs were developed. The story reached newspapers. Investigators examined the images. Some suggested a person in a reflective suit, possibly attempting a prank. Others pointed to the possibility of an industrial worker wearing protective gear. But no one came forward to claim responsibility. No costume was recovered. No footprints conclusively linked to a known source were documented, and Greenhaw maintained his account consistently. The aftermath was not kind to him. The attention brought ridicule. Professional consequences followed, yet he did not retract his story. The Falkville Metal Man differs from earlier cases in one crucial way. There is photographic evidence. Blurry, limited, open to interpretation, but tangible. And yet, even with images, certainty remains out of reach. If it was a prankster, why risk confrontation with an armed officer? Why vanish without claiming notoriety? If it was protective gear, why run at such speed into darkness rather than identify oneself? And if the photographs truly capture something unknown, Why does the figure appear so deliberately humanoid? Unlike the Mothman, this entity did not seem winged. Unlike Gévaudan, it did not attack. Unlike the Dover demon, it did not hide in trees. It stood openly on a highway, observed, photographed, pursued, then gone. This case closes the pattern in an unsettling way. Across centuries and continents, witnesses describe beings that appear briefly, behave strangely, and retreat before capture. Sometimes there are dozens of observers. Sometimes there are official reports. Sometimes even photographs. But never confirmation strong enough to end the debate. If something truly exists just beyond the edge of classification, would it not appear exactly like this? Clear enough to be described, unclear enough to deny. And if it has been stepping into view for generations, how many more times has it stood under streetlights, waiting to see who notices first? Conclusion. Across centuries, across continents, across cultures separated by language, technology, and belief systems, the pattern repeats. A shape appears in the dark. It is seen by more than one person, sometimes by dozens, occasionally by trained officers. It is described in detail. The descriptions align in ways that feel too precise to dismiss casually. Height, eyes, movement, behavior. The outline remains stable even when the setting changes. Then it vanishes. No body, no specimen, no definitive capture. The Mothman circled before a bridge collapsed. The Beast of Gévaudan hunted through farmland. Small figures surrounded a Kentucky farmhouse. A metallic humanoid stood under an Alabama streetlight. Victorian witnesses swore something vaulted rooftops with impossible force. Each case has a rational explanation available. Misidentification, exaggeration, cultural influence, fear shaping memory. And yet none of those explanations fully seals every crack. If these were isolated incidents, dismissal would be easy. But repetition complicates certainty. When hundreds of people, separated by decades and geography, describe beings that move just beyond the boundary of capture, the question becomes harder to ignore. Are we witnessing the mechanics of collective perception under stress? A human tendency to project form into shadow? Or are these encounters fragments of something that does not remain long enough to be measured, but long enough to be remembered? If something wanted to exist at the edge of belief, never fully proven and never fully erased, would it not appear exactly like this? Clear enough to be seen, elusive enough to survive,